Alright, hello everyone, my name is Disc, and in this video I wanted to kind of just take a moment before the season starts and do a deep dive into our talent book, talking about some of the synergies and talking about some of the choices I'm making. I think there's a lot of opportunity in here to min-max the spec and get more out of it. This is mainly going to be a Mythic Plus guide. I think there's a lot of elements of this video you can take to other modes of play. This is mainly going to be for Mythic Plus, and one of the main catalysts why I wanted to make this video, it was the end of last season. I was kicked from a group, and I think it was a warrior or something. His comment was, "You're not even taking warding." And I think that is just such a problem to kick someone from a group based on their talent choices, especially if you're not, intimately tied to them and know how they work. I think what happens here is people will divert to like Wowhead or Icy Veins and take that as their doctrine. And I just don't think that's the best way to approach those guides. I think they should be taken with a grain of salt, and you should definitely consider the audience they're written for. They're most often, if I had to guess, written for people who roll a Disc Priest and just want an idea of where to bank their points so they can start playing. And with so many points on the table, I don't really think there's ever going to be a best build. I think the best build is going to be one that plays to your strengths, your playstyle, plays to the group, and plays to the dungeon. So there are a lot of exciting things in here, and I'm really looking forward to this season. So let's go through this, and I want to make some arguments about my choices here. So here we go. We are a Void Weaver Priest. We are still Mindbender, of course. So the biggest change coming from Dragonflight is between our Mindbenders, we have baked in now a gap. So it used to be as one Mindbender was ending, the next one was kind of ready, but we don't have that privilege anymore. These are much more valuable of spells, and there's always a gap in between, which really changes how I approach talents along with our hero talents. Another big deciding factor is the change to Rapture. I didn't used to spend 2 points here, but now I do. I think Rapture is a lot better spell now. I think it's where it needed to be all along, and it's so good. I think it would behoove us to take 2 additional shields. Without getting too much into this, the idea here, I am taking Wheel and Woe also, by the way, as a bottom row talent. The idea, since Rapture is a little bit more comfortable in a longer window, is you'll cast 1 shield, cast a penance for the Wheel and Woe, and back to shields. And you can do that at least 2 times. So you'll cast a Rapture, and you really want to bank off your shields here, and that'll really empower it. But since we had to bank 1 extra point here, it opened up 1 extra floater point, which I've banked into Long Schism, which we'll talk about. Definitely over Painful Punishment. I think this is a nice quality of life thing, but I really can't justify it. Keeping your dots up is something you need to practice doing with your penance. That is one of our utilities. So Malicious Intent, I think, is going to be the clear winner between those two, and I am going to talk about that more. But let's segue over to our hero talents. I want to talk about at least 2 of these choice notes here and why I've gone the other direction off of what Wowhead says. And it's simply put, I think these nodes will get you more out of the spec if you can step up to the plate and do what they're asking. So the first node I want to talk about is Darkening Horizon over Void Empowerment. So a lot of times when it comes to choice nodes, I think one is either like raid focused, one's Mythic Plus focused. Also, I see a lot of times one's like a free buff and one's a buff you kind of have to work for. And when you're faced with those choices, do I want something free or something that requires a little bit more work? Almost always I'm going to favor a little bit more work because I think the juice is worth the squeeze. And what's happening here is our Rift is empowered by every bit of penance we cast. And with Darkening Horizon extending our Rift, we can now get 2 penance into our Rift, whereas this one over here, we can only get like 1. And not only can we get 2, we can very comfortably get 2. So this is something you have to think about. This is something you have to make sure you're adding to your spell priorities when your Rift is out. But there's really not much to it, and this will double the output of your Rift. And I'm sure we've all noticed by now at the end of dungeons, if we look at our output, our Rift and our Mindbender are our 2 biggest drivers, and the Rift being almost totally passive, I don't know why you wouldn't want to double it with Darkening Horizon. It's going to get more Void Blast, more Penance, I just think it's the right way to go, and it's definitely what I'm going to be playing. And this is the big one. So the recommended node here is the Void Wraith over Depth of Shadow. Depth of Shadows, I don't know why I can't say that, but I just think the Depth of Shadows here is going to be clearly the right way to go if you're trying to min-max your spec and get the most out of it. There is a commonality here, and it's that no matter which one you pick, the encouragement is to either target high health enemies or target low health enemies. And the advantage you get when you're targeting low health enemies is we get one extra spell, and it's coming from our death reset, these 2 points here. So we get a death reset, we get one extra spell, that's also an extra torment. I'm not going to get into that, please revisit my last video. But it's one extra torment. And so what this is going to do is not only going to allow us to have a longer window, it's going to be a stronger window as well. So kind of the way I think about it is, at best, if you're playing Void Wraith, if you're attacking someone 100% health, you're going to have a 1.5x Void Wraith. Over here, you can have a 3x. So it's 1.5 versus 3 times more powerful. There is an RNG element of this, but I still think there's going to be more to get out of it. It is a really interesting playstyle and how it kind of reprioritizes your spells based on like kind of where you are in your rotation. Kind of as a joke, I've said to my friends, like the way I think about it is like in spelling, you know, there's that rule I before E except after C and sometimes Y. That's just kind of how I see it. There's a lot of different ways you can utilize this. So over here, we were talking about a base torment window is 5 torments. One of the nice things with this, so my last video focused all on what to do when your Mindbender's out, very important, but also a very fair question is now what do we do when our Mindbender isn't out, when we're sitting in this gap? And that's where this comes into play. You know, there's a lot of mini games you can do to fill your time in between Mindbenders, and this just gives you one extra thing to think about. And our Mindbender is one of the best things we have for output. And what this will do is even if your Mindbender is on cooldown, you can kind of just find a mob that's approaching 20 and sit on it and wait until it reaches execute range. Get your deaths, summon free pseudo Mindbenders while you're still letting your actual Mindbender cool down, and you can get another 5 torments. So a base is 5 over here, and with Depth of Shadows, you can also get another 5 for free. So kind of the way I see it is you can go for 3 extra torments. So when it comes to rotation, I'm going to try not to sidetrack too much. If you're playing Void Wraith, you're probably always going to want to favor Penance before Death for the torments. But with Depth of Shadows, it's opposite. I think you're always going to want to favor Death before Penance. And consider this. So if I'm proccing 2 free Mindbenders and I've already spent my Penance, I'm sacrificing those 2 free Mindbenders torments. So the idea here is you always want to bank your Penance. So you'll Death, then Penance, and that will be 3 torments. Or just an idea. So per trash pull, we're likely only going to get 1 Mindbender, 1 Rift. I think there's opportunities for 1 Mindbender, 2 Rifts. It just depends. I've kind of toyed around with it a little bit, and I've had pretty good success with it. But imagine if we're approaching execute range on a boss. It doesn't matter if we throw cooldowns, a boss is dying. What we can do is Death, get 2 Mindbenders out, then Blast, Penance. So remember, Blast and Penance are our torment spells. So now with 2 Mindbenders out and we backload the Rift and the Penance, now we've gotten an additional 5 torments for free. And a 5 torment is our base over here. So I just think this is going to be the way to go. It's going to give you longer windows potentially. It's going to give you a lot to do in between Mindbenders. And instead of 1.5 times stronger, this can be up to 3 times stronger. So I just think it is the standout choice, at least for me. And I want to talk a little bit too about the priest side of things and why I'm making these choices. So per Wowhead, they are saying Protective Light. That is what I played for years, but I'm actually going From Darkness Comes Light now. And I think this is going to be a really good change for me considering how much actual personal defense I have in the list. But one of our weaknesses, there's no getting around it. We're not reactionary healers. I think a lot of times, you know, if you're ahead of damage with Wheel and Woe, that is your spot healing. But we can't get around the fact that sometimes we have to play reactionarily. And I think this is just going to be a really nice way to kind of level the playing field and give more output reactionarily. And then before I talk about these guys, I want to talk about down here. So I was looking at the suggestions online and it says to go straight down to increased range. I just can't ever justify that it versus giving output or giving defense, which is why I go for the bulwark. It's essentially our talent book's cheat death. And I think I've just played with this forever and I think it's the way to go. And it's going to force you into crystalline reflection, which I think is often overlooked. But with how shieldy our spec is right now, I think this is a great way to turn a defensive spell offensive. So we have increased shields here. We have increased shields here. Our tier set is going to be increased shields. We have increased shields here. It's just going to make our shield casts not a total loss of output. And I think this is going to be really good. Something to note is I'm not, at least here, I'm not spec'd into any dispels. Consider these my flex nodes. So like if I have to go this way, what I'll do is just kind of move those around as my flex. I'm sorry, I'll probably do it like this. And that's something you just have to know dungeon by dungeon. You don't want to waste a point into Mass Dispel if you don't need it for that dungeon. So something to consider is being comfortable enough with your book to flex points around as needed. And then now over to the Holy Nova and the Words of Pious area. This has been recommended for a very long time, but I've just not been able to justify it. Before now, all that mattered was our Mindbender and its CDR. I couldn't justify 4 points over here when I really needed to just be spamming Smite anyway. This was just one extra global that didn't impact our Mindbender, so I couldn't justify it. But now that we have these gaps in between our Mindbender, it has a lot better play. And I also think this is going to increase our Void Blast. Please chime in if I'm wrong. I did check Google, but I can't tell. But I think Words of the Pious will increase our Blast. Talk about that in a second. But Holy Nova, always been a great spell. I've always loved instant cast spells that have no cooldown, but I just couldn't justify it. But if we're going to take Nova, we ought to take Rhapsody. And if we are going to take Rhapsody, we really ought to take Pious. And I think this has some really good play with our Rift 2, which I'll explain. But as an opener, what I'm finding is I'm calling it like as a joke, kind of like a drive-by shooting. Don't demonetize me, but like I'll shield myself to proc the Words of the Pious, run in with my body and soul, drop my Rhapsody, and then go into my rotation. It's a good idea to get that reset early, so by the time your Mindbender ends, your Rhapsody is already recharged. But something to think about is, so per standard pull, we're going to have one Mindbender and up to 2 Rifts. If you're in one of those places where you're letting your Mindbender rest, but you are going to go ahead and cast a Rift for the, the damage grab, an idea is you shield, then Rift. And I'm pretty sure the Words of the Pious will increase your Void Blast too. This is a really strong spell for us that we get quite a bit, and increasing it by 10% is really good. I don't think Words of the Pious necessarily needs to be tracked. I think, I track it. It's a mini game I really try and min-max, but I think you can just let it be passive and just do your best to keep it up. But it's something that really ties in well over here. And then I want to talk about the difference between malicious intent and painful punishment. This is what is recommended online, and I think it's a nice quality of life, but we really should be keeping our dots up with our penance. Malicious intent, I just think, is the clear choice here. It's really going to empower everything with our Mindbender. It's really going to empower our healing during our Shadow Covenant windows. And most importantly, it's going to empower our Rift. So consider that I am taking a longer Rift. It's going to give me more blasts for the power. It's going to give me 2 penance to increase the Rift's output. But what the Long Schism is going to do is it's not only going to increase all of my Void Blasts, it's going to increase the damage of both of my penance, which are increasing the power of my Rift. So with Darkening Horizon, if you don't take Long Schism, what's going to happen is your second penance is not going to be buffed. So I wanted to go ahead and buff that second penance to buff my Rift. And then the really nice thing about the Long Schism is that debuff will always be active also for the Collapse, which is why I think this is just kind of like the clear standout choice. With how powerful our Rift is, let's just go ahead and buff the whole thing. Since it's a passive, this is just, I've always liked it. In the past, there are times when I couldn't justify it, but now I think it's totally justifiable. With 2 extra points here, we kind of have this one floater, which I put here. And some quick honorable mentions before we wrap this video up. I wanted to talk about Vampiric Embrace. This is a really nice spell. It's going to Divine Star versus Halo, and Power Word Life. So Vampiric Embrace, again, I'd kind of rather just go for group healing rather than personal. There is no global here, so I just bind it into my Mind Blast. I'm sorry, keep bind it into my Mind Blast. And it plays really well with our other major defensive, so that's just why I take it. I think it's the better choice, and it's something I'm very used to, so this is just going to be my choice moving forward. And then Divine Star versus Halo. There's a couple things we can talk about here. In Mythic Plus, I kind of always will rather an instant cast versus a cast. It allows you to have some output even if you have to sidestep ground damage. And then the thing to think about is these spells do get empowered by our Shadow Covenant. They have a Shadow version, but our Mindbender window is so finite, it's kind of hard sometimes to even get those 5 base torments. It's even harder if you're trying to work in an extra cast. So you can always fit in an instant, which I just think why it's the better choice. I think some dungeons, I am going to play with Halo coming up, but I think some dungeons with massive AoE, this might be the better choice for output. Stay tuned. And then Powered Life. So this is one of those where it's raid versus M+, free versus a little bit of work. But I think Powered Life is just the way to go. It has a lot of utility, and it does just kind of amplify our reactionary healing a little bit. And just food for thought, one of the ways I'll use this is, let's say there's group-wide damage coming in. I'm giving output, group output with my Mindbender. I'm kind of letting someone sink low to this life range, and I have my grid 2 enabled to kind of help it stand out when they're sub 35%. And then I'll life them to kind of level the playing field. And it has been buffed, so I just think that's the way to go. It also applies atonement, so I think it's kind of just the way to go. But these are just some of those nodes where it's adding a spell to your book, the Vampiric Embrace. So it is just one more thing to manage, but I think it's going to be the right choice, just my opinion. But I think that's everything for this video. Please sound off below if you either, I don't know, disagree with me or have questions. I'd really like to see what the community thinks about Disciplined Priest moving forward. I've been looking for disc content online. I've really just not seen any. So I wanted to kind of throw my voice into the pot and talk about some of my decisions, defend some of my decisions, and highlight some of the reasons as to why I think this is going to be a really strong build for min-maxing Mythic Plus. So again, thanks for tuning in, mainly Mythic Plus channel moving forward. I think a lot of what I talk about here can apply to other modes of play, but yeah, stay tuned. I'm going to try and do one video per week at least, talking about UI, my decisions behind things, kind of the inner workings to my mind as I approach polls, what I'm thinking about, and how I'm min-maxing each one of these spells individually. So with all that being said, thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, Disc.